Dear friends, I welcome you for EPG Pathshala course on disaster management and disaster preparedness. I am Amir Ali Khan. During this unit, we are going to discuss about basic concepts of disaster management and what is disaster preparedness and how we can mitigate the impact of disasters. So, what is disaster management? Disaster management is basically a science through which we try to mitigate the impact, to minimize the impact of impending disasters, and we do take proactive measures before disaster and try to manage the event by taking some steps through which we can provide some consolation, some relief to the affected community. To explain further disaster management, concept of disaster management, we have to define the concept of disaster management cycle. What is disaster management cycle? Disaster management cycle is nothing but the sequential management of an event which is leading to a disaster. So, to begin with, the disaster management cycle generally starts with a happening of an event or a disaster. So, what is the first step after a disaster has taken place? So, we have to look for the survivors and we have to take search and rescue operations. So, the first step in disaster management cycle is search and rescue. So, at search and rescue stage itself, you need some sophisticated equipments, you need trained manpower, you need so many things. So, first you have to search the survivors, then you have to rescue them. So, when we are talking about rescuing, so there are specialized agencies for search and rescue, but most of the time, or you can say at the majority of time, a local community is responsible for this action. Specialized agencies, which we are going to discuss at the later stage, like NDRF, SDRF, police and other agencies involved in that, they come slightly later, but the first responder is the community. So, we have to build the capacity of communities to do search and rescue. Those who have been survived the disaster and those who have been rescued need to be provided some relief. So, second stage of disaster management cycle is relief. When you are going to talk about relief, relief has to be provided to affected parties like those injured, you have to provide some medical assistance. Those who have lost their houses, you have to provide them shelter. Then this type of material you have to provide during relief. When you are talking about relief, so you have to make arrangement for food, water, clothes, medicines and all sort of those things which are necessary to make survivors feel comfortable after a disaster. So, when we are providing relief, we have to take care of food, medicines, clothes, shelter and all these things. Here the important thing is how long you have to provide relief. Relief you can't provide for indefinite period. So, relief is short term measure to provide some assistance to the affected community. So, relief generally continues for few days to maximum week or at the most few weeks. So, when you are providing shelter, so sheltering under relief stage you have to provide some tents. अगर हम हिंदी में कहें कि उनको सर छुपाने की जगह देनी होती है. So, you provide shelter either in camps, temporary sheltering, or you have to take assistance or provide shelter in schools and those community buildings. So, you have to provide relief. The next stage of disaster management cycle is recovery. Recovery is short term and long term. Under short term recovery, you have to provide some assistance to those, you have to restart the life supporting infrastructure facilities like water supply is impacted. So, you have to start providing water supply. Electricity is impacted, so electricity is disrupted. So, you have to restart providing electricity. Likewise, all important life supporting facilities has to be restarted, that is under short term recovery. What is long term recovery? Long term recovery, you have to provide facilities like your rehabilitation, reconstruction and all those things. So, we have search and rescue, we have relief, we have recovery. Recovery is again two types, short term and long term. Then comes under recovery is rehabilitation. What is rehabilitation? Under rehabilitation stage, you have to provide facilities which were existing before disaster has taken place. So, under rehabilitation you try to bring some normalcy. So, rehabilitation is again of various types. You have to provide rehabilitate physically the affected community. Like if we define or we can categorize rehabilitation is physical rehabilitation, social rehabilitation, economic rehabilitation and environmental rehabilitation. So, under physical rehabilitation, what you are supposed to do is you have to provide some temporary sheltering. In the first stage, we provided emergency shelter, where you just put some tents or some provided shelter in some camps and all those things. Now, under rehabilitation stage, which is slightly different than the relief stage, you have to provide some temporary sheltering. Under temporary sheltering, you have to provide some type of permanency, like those temporary shelters should be of that strength so that people can survive few months, few years until permanent housing is coming under reconstruction stage. So, you are rehabilitating people under physical rehabilitation. Then what is social rehabilitation? So, under social rehabilitation, you are rehabilitating people socially, like in the earlier part we discussed about impact of disasters, like people got orphaned, some earning member, male member has lost his or her life. Then what families are going to do? Like those orphans, those kids whose parents have lost their lives. So, you have to start some orphanages, you have to take some care of those, and all those, like those people who are now having no ownership to take, like elderly people whose kids or wards are no more there. So, you have to take care of those things. So, all activities related to social actions are under social rehabilitation. Then economic rehabilitation. So, the affected community, as we discussed earlier, you see fishermen were affected, farmers were affected, daily wage laborers were affected. So, how they are going to survive? So, you have to provide some sort of economic activity to them. And when we are talking about economic activities, you have to provide some facilities so that they can generate their livelihood options. So, in case of fishermen, you have to provide some assistance to procure their boats, to nets and some training skills if they are going to have some other means of livelihood. Similarly, for farmers, you have to provide assistance for seeds, for bullocks and all sort of things. And basically, under economic rehabilitation, you have to provide some assistance so that people can restart earning their livelihood. So, this is economic rehabilitation. And when you are providing assistance to under economic rehabilitation, you have to provide some soft loans, some grants and that sort of thing. So, most of the time you can provide grants and sometimes you can provide some soft loans. And during this socio-economic rehabilitation, you have to provide some training to enhance the skills of the survivors. Like if there is only one lady whose husband has been no more after a disaster. So, you have to provide some skills to that lady so that she can start earning some livelihood, like provide training in sewing, in some other thing, some soft loan to start some shop, to that sort of small activities. So, that is socio-economic rehabilitation. Similarly, the fourth category is your environmental rehabilitation. Under environmental rehabilitation, you have to rehabilitate the environment. For example, when tsunami came or during cyclones, lot of seawater comes and inundate the land area. And due to that salination, when seawater recedes, lot of salination, land salination do take place. Lot of salt is deposited on the land. So, you have to take measures to desalinate the entire area. Similarly, in case of floods, lot of sands come and it destroys the agricultural land. So, those measures. Similarly, in landslide, a lot of land is swept away by the slide. So, you have to take care of all those things. The next stage is your reconstruction. Reconstruction is slightly more time consuming, and after big disasters, especially earthquakes, reconstruction programs take several years, and under reconstruction stage you have to take care of building the infrastructure facilities, building the fully damaged villages, and sometimes you have to relocate the affected villages. So reconstruction takes a lot of time, like for example, after Gujarat earthquake, several villages were reconstructed, rebuilt. So it took several years, 5, 6, 7 years to rebuild the entire facility. When you are building, reconstructing the entire facility, entire village, so you have to provide some better version of facilities which were existing before disaster. So when we are going for reconstruction of the damaged facility, we take slightly more efforts in making the facilities under reconstruction stage slightly better than whatever existing before disaster. So we do say building back better approach. So whatever you are building in reconstruction stage, it should be in a better manner, so that it's a disaster management cycle. Disaster is coming again. So in the next cycle of disaster, your facilities which you have already constructed should survive the next cycle of disaster. So under reconstruction stage, you have to take the approach of building back better. So up till now we have discussed search and rescue, relief, recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. So all these activities are post disaster management, second half of disaster management cycle. What is there in the first half of disaster management cycle? So in the pre-disaster management part, or first half of disaster management cycle, there are various stages which are prevention, mitigation and preparedness. So what is prevention? Prevention is, you can't prevent happening of an earthquake or any hazard converting into disaster. What you are supposed to do is, you have to take those appropriate measures, like in case of an earthquake come, but there should be no damage. And how it should happen? You have to build your built environment, your cities, your villages, your houses, everything, your infrastructure facilities earthquake safe. And how can you do that? Building codes and building bylaws are already available. So you have to incorporate those things. You have to take care of those things while constructing your facilities. So that is the preventive measures. What happens most of the time when you are taking reconstruction stage and prevention stage, so most of the time we miss this trick. So after so many efforts, we have realized that there is a definite link in post disaster management and pre disaster management. Under reconstruction stage, you have to build your houses not only for one type of hazard prevailing in your area. You have to take care of multi-hazard approach, comprehensive approach, holistic approach, and simultaneously you have to start taking preventive measures. You impart training to masons and all those things, so that under prevention stage, after reconstruction, prevention stage has to start. So many things you have to take, and you have to link reconstruction stage with the prevention stage. Then comes the mitigation. Mitigation is like in prevention, you have built your house earthquake safe or disaster safe for say, but is that sufficient? No. You have to keep on upgrading the strengths and all those things, proper maintenance. Mitigation is long term sustainable development. So things has to be done in proper manner. Mitigation is minimizing the impact of disaster. So you have to keep on taking those efforts which are always necessary for minimizing the impact. Now comes the preparedness. What is preparedness? Preparedness is that stage where you take all those actions which are necessary to minimize the impact of impending disaster. So when we are talking preparedness, we are discussing slightly later all those what all things are involved in preparedness. So this is the entire disaster management cycle, which I hope make you understand the concept of disaster management. Another way of defining or describing disaster management is you can divide it into mitigation part and the response part. Response part, we have all those things like search and rescue, relief, recovery and all those things. In the mitigation part, we can divide mitigation into three parts like risk assessment, preventive measures and early warning. If you have the early warning facilities available as is available in case of cyclones, is available in case of floods and other disasters like drought as well. So you can preempt the things and you can take appropriate measures to evacuate people. But early warnings are not possible in few of the disasters, like as of now a robust early warning system is not existing for earthquakes. So you can't evacuate people when impending earthquake is coming. You generally don't know when is earthquake coming. So early warning is not possible and you can't evacuate people. But in case of cyclone, early warning have been used very effectively and we have been able to evacuate people to safer locations. When cyclone passes away, lot of damage do take place, but human lives can be saved. Then comes the preventive measures. So preventive measures are comprised of three things. One is structural measures and number two non-structural measures and retrofitting. So under retrofitting, what you are supposed to do is you have to retrofitting is generally done to the structures, and for providing retrofitting these structures you have to consult some engineers and professionals, structural engineers. In case of an earthquake you have to consult earthquake engineers or structural engineers. They will provide you certain guidelines, they will evaluate your building, they will see how your building was constructed, when was constructed, they will evaluate, they will study and they will recommend some measures to incorporate, and after that your building will be safe. Then comes what is structural and non-structural measures. Structural measures are those measures which are generally you work with the structures. Like in case of retrofitting, retrofitting is the structural measure. So when you are taking the structural measures again are for the structures of your built environment. How the preventive measures help in structural measures are like you have to incorporate building bylaws, you have to take implement the building codes and all these things. So this is the structural measure. When you work with the structures to make the lesser impact of the disaster. What are the non-structural measures? There are several non-structural measures. Non-structural measures are those measures where you are not working with the structures, but you are doing all those things. There are several things other than the structures to mitigate the impact of disasters. One of them is like capacity building, land use planning, like for example land use planning. So you have to plan your city in such a manner, those areas which are exposed, you should not develop them. Similarly, your capacity building activities like training and imparting training and doing so many things. So you take lot of measures which are non-structural in nature, and through them you try to mitigate the impact of disasters. The third is risk assessment. So if you are able to assess the risk, then you can minimize the impact of disaster, you can mitigate the impact of disasters, and there are various ways of doing risk assessment. You have to do hazard mapping, you have to do vulnerability mapping, and based on that you can have the risk maps. If risk maps are available, you can very well know that what level of risk is available. Like in case of flood, if you know that your ground floor is going to be submerged in the flood waters, then you plan your habitation, your facilities, your buildings in such a fashion that the ground floor is always available for parking and that sort of for facilities. At the time of a floods you can evacuate very easily. But as I told, risk analysis is available, can be based on hazard analysis and vulnerability analysis. As mentioned earlier as well, hazard maps are available. Hazard maps at national level up to district level are available for flood, cyclone and other hazards. So what you are supposed to do is, we have the macro level maps available. India map is there, as we discussed in the seismic hazard map. India is divided into 4 parts: zone 5, zone 4, zone 3, zone 2. But like in case of Delhi is a small city state where entire city is in zone 4. But to understand you can't have same type of profile of the soil and other things similar in Delhi. Like in Delhi we have hilly areas which is ridge area, we have alluvium which is Yamuna area, we have middle areas as well. So entire Delhi can't be categorized in zone 1. So what you are supposed to do is you have to go for microzonation. What is microzonation is you have to divide the entire city or entire state or entire entity into smaller parts and go for detailed analysis, and based on that detailed analysis you can plan your facilities accordingly. So hazard analysis has to be go for up to that level. Similarly, vulnerability analysis, you have to analyze vulnerability as we discussed earlier: social vulnerability, physical vulnerability, economic vulnerability, environmental vulnerability. And when you are able to develop the vulnerability analysis maps and hazard maps at local level, you can combine them and you can have the risk maps available. Once risk maps are available, you can minimize the impact of impending disasters. Developed countries like Japan, USA, Switzerland, Australia, many of them including New Zealand, they have developed their risk maps available. So let us change the topic from basic concept of disaster management to some who are the disaster managers. Generally disasters are managed by the government, and basic responsibility of managing disasters are of that the concerned state government. So state governments are responsible for managing disasters. Central government provides assistance in terms of financial and other logistical support. We have a Disaster Management Act which was passed by the Parliament in 2005. According to that, we have a big and robust disaster management institutional mechanism existing at national level, which defines disaster management into 3 tiers. Disaster management system, we have national system, national level agencies and organizations which are managing disasters. We have state level agencies which are managing disasters, and we are having district level agencies which are managing disasters. So basic responsibility of managing disasters are of that concerned state, and within the state concerned affected district or district magistrate is responsible for managing disasters at their level. As mentioned, at national level we have National Disaster Management Authority, we have National Disaster Response Force, we have National Institute of Disaster Management. At state level we have state government itself, we have State Disaster Management Authority, we have some states have state disaster response agencies, and at district level we have district disaster management authorities as well. National authority, NDMA or National Disaster Management Authority is chaired by Prime Minister. State authorities, state disaster management authorities are chaired by the respective chief ministers, and district disaster management authorities are managed by district magistrates. As mentioned earlier, what is disaster preparedness? Disaster preparedness generally is to prepare community and society to take care of the impending disaster. And in that, as discussed earlier as well, that who is the worst sufferer in case of a disaster? It's basically the community which is get affected by the impact of the disaster, and community is the first responder itself. So it become imperative, or it become very important to build the capacity of the community. So we have to build the capacity for disaster management at community level. There are several advantages of building the capacity of the community. As mentioned, they are the first responder. If they know how to search and rescue, how to provide relief, so dependence on the external agencies like NDMA, NDRF, SDRF and other agencies is reduced. So you have to build the capacity of that. Then you have to build the capacity of those formal response agencies like NDRF and SDRF, police, fire department and all those agencies who are the first responders to disasters and who has to take care of the initial stages of disaster management or emergency management. So this is the first part. Then another important component of disaster preparedness is the early warning. So early warning, you have to provide early warning for impending disasters in few of the disasters early warning is not possible, but few of the disasters early warning system is possible. If you are able to provide early warning, then you can evacuate people, and when people are evacuated you can save their lives. In case of early warning system, there are certain responsible agencies who are providing early warning. In case of there are definite agencies which has been designated to provide early warning in case of impending disasters or hazards. Like cyclone, Indian Meteorological Department is responsible agency which provides early warning. They provide forecast and then provide early warning. In case of tsunami, it's INCOIS system in Hyderabad. Heat and cold waves, it's provided by IMD again. Floods, it's a Central Water Commission which provides the early warning. So similarly, various agencies are responsible and they provide early warning to the impending hazards, and based on the early warning you have to provide end-to-end early warning to the communities. Means you have to provide early warning system so that people can be evacuated to safer locations, and you have to make all those arrangements during that period for safety and other welfare schemes when people are evacuated. So there are several examples at national level where we are able to evacuate people very effectively, and one of them is the cyclone Phylline which took place in 2013, and during that cyclone which happened in Orissa, and IMD was able to predict accurately that cyclone is coming, and based on the early warning issued by IMD, state government in association with central government, NDMA, NDRF and other responsible agencies were able to evacuate almost 7 to 8 lakh people. And this when they were evacuating people, there were not so many well planned robust cyclone shelters available around. So the state machinery in consultation with district administration, they identified those buildings which can be used as cyclone shelters. So all government buildings, schools and other pakka structures which fall under that category, they put the evacuees into them, and during that evacuation 7-8 hours, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, they provided all facilities like food, water and all those things, and that is one of the successful case studies of recent thing. And the best part is the efforts made during that cyclone Phylline has been recognized as one of the best international practices, and that is one of the achievement of Government of India, Government of Orissa and every one of us, and that gives a lot of positivity to the entire system of disaster management when our best efforts were recognized by the international agencies. The third component of the disaster preparedness is that you have to prepare disaster management plans, and disaster management plans, while preparing those plans you have to take care of your hazard, vulnerability and everything, and besides that you have to take care of your stocks, your equipments necessary for search and rescue and relief, stocks necessary for providing relief. You have to compile the list of all possible resources which require there, which you have to ensure their availability. You have to develop the contact list, and you have to develop a robust disaster management plan. And the disaster management plan, when developing, you have to take care of involve all stakeholders available at that level. So disaster management planning is the key for robust disaster management preparedness. So disaster management planning or disaster management plans are an integral part of preparedness measures or entire disaster management. Based on those disaster management plans, you can plan your search and rescue, relief, recovery activities. So planning everything post-disaster scenarios, in pre-disaster scenarios is your disaster management planning. So disaster management plans need to be developed, and those need to be developed in consultation with the concerned stakeholders. So disaster management plans need to be developed in consultation with the concerned stakeholders and disaster management plans again need to be developed at various levels. We have the national plan, states have their state plans, we have district plans, we have local level plans, you can develop plans up to village level, community level, or even household level, your family plan. So disaster management planning is the key for successful disaster preparedness. Simultaneously, we have to touch upon the international efforts made in the area of disaster management. Recently in 2015 we have Sendai Declaration on Disaster Management. We do say Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. So according to Sendai Framework of Disaster Risk Reduction, we have 4 priority areas and 7 targets to be achieved. By 2030 we have to achieve so many things, which includes reducing, we have defined some targets and we have to achieve those things by 2030. So what is SFDRR is a follow up of HFA, which is Hugo Framework of Action, which was the guiding principle at international level from 2005 to 2015. So international community is constantly coming out with the guidelines and frameworks through which we are dictating our disaster management activities at national level. So when we are working in tandem with the international community, results are really very good. So we have to work, take further on those targets, and we have international targets. Similarly, we have Asian or regional level targets. Similarly, we are in the process of developing national targets to be achieved by 2030. So we are in a very good and robust path of disaster risk reduction at national level. So just to conclude, I would like to emphasize upon a relationship between disaster and development. So when you are going for development of any kind of development at national level or any level, you have to take care of disasters, because disasters development increases your vulnerability sometimes, and same time if you are doing good type of development, that reduces your vulnerability. Similarly, disasters take lot of damages. During disasters, lot of damages do happen simultaneously, and the most important part of disaster management is disasters provide opportunities for robust development. What do I see opportunity during disaster is that when you are going for building back better and taking preventive measures after disaster, that is the opportunity. And if I quote example from post Gujarat earthquake reconstruction program, we took this opportunity and we are able to build a very strong system in Gujarat after Gujarat earthquake. We initiated retrofitting program, we initiated training of masons program. We incorporated all spheres of disaster management in our day-to-day functioning of the society and system. So while going for disaster management, we have to take care of our developmental activities and vice versa. So you have to incorporate disaster management thing in your developmental activities, then we can say our system is going to be safe against impending disasters. So that is the time for investing. So we have to invest lot of things before disaster is happening, and so that our system can sustain and survive the impact of impending disasters. Thank you.